11 o'clock at night on the 14th of February, and the Kestrel diner had only one customer left. All evening, the place had been packed with couples. Every table had flowers, a candle jammed into the neck of a bottle, the sound of laughter. By 11 they were gone, leaving behind tables full of dirty plates and a few rose petals scattered across the floor. Only the man in the corner booth remained. He had been sitting there since 8, a cup of coffee gone cold in front of him, untouched. Outside the window, a black car sat idling with a driver still behind the wheel. At the counter near the door, a broad-shouldered man had been sitting for 3 straight hours without ordering a single thing. Maren Hollis knew the 3 of them had come together. Everyone in the North End knew the face of the man in the corner booth. She wrung out her dish towel, hung it on the hook, and walked over. "Are you really going to spend Valentine's night sitting here by yourself?" The man did not look up right away. He turned the silver ring on his little finger once, then raised his eyes to her. Gray eyes, still as water before a storm. "Apparently so," he said, his voice very quiet. "Is that a problem for you?" "Not for me." Maren did not step back. "But it looks like a serious problem for you." The man at the counter turned his head slightly. Nobody in this city spoke to August Ferraro in that tone. Not his employees, not his partners, not even the men who carried his last name. "I don't need company to get through one night." "Do you really have everything?" She glanced at the cold coffee. "Because I've worked the night shift here for 3 years. Tonight I served 42 people. 41 of them came here to be with someone. And you've sat for 3 hours without touching a thing. People only do that when they're hiding from something." This time the silence stretched longer. Maren took a breath and adjusted the strap of her bag. "I'm heading home to have a late dinner with my brother. 4 blocks from here. If you want to come along, there's still time." The pause that followed was long enough that the man at the counter half rose from his seat. "Are you inviting me to dinner?" "I am." She shrugged. "Today is the day people sit next to each other, not the day you sit alone with a cold cup of coffee." August Ferraro looked at her for a long moment. In his entire life, nobody had ever offered him anything without expecting something back. Not once. "You know who I am?" "I do," Maren said, without blinking, "and I asked anyway." She pulled her keys from her coat pocket. "Red brick building on the corner of Prince Street, 3rd floor, door on the left. The buzzer's been broken for 3 years, so knock hard. We eat late in my house, so there's no need to rush." She gave a small wave and stepped out the back door, leaving the last of the scraps for the stray dog that waited there every night. August sat alone among the tables, still covered in wilting flowers and burned-out candles, in the diner where, 20 years earlier, his father used to take him for breakfast every Sunday morning. He had no way of knowing that the woman who had just invited him home was carrying a secret that led directly back to him, or that before this winter was over, the 2 of them would pay for that dinner with things no amount of money could ever buy back. Some Valentine's nights come with no flowers and no candles, just a simple invitation that changes an entire life. If Maren and August's story touched you that way, leave a like and share it with the person you'd set an extra place for. And don't forget to subscribe, there's a seat saved for you here every week. The restaurant door closed behind him, and the February cold hit his face like a slap. The parking lot behind Kestrel had only 3 lights, and 2 of them were broken. The broad-shouldered man walked half a step ahead of him, then stopped. Someone was standing beside the black car, a middle-aged man, wearing a coat that was far too thin for the weather, both hands buried deep in his pockets, and he'd been standing there long enough for a thin layer of frost to gather across his shoulders. The broad-shouldered man stepped forward, but August lifted one hand slightly. It was a small gesture, and the other man stepped back. "Mr. Ferraro." The middle-aged man's voice broke on those first 2 words. "I know I shouldn't have come here. I know. But I've called 3 times and nobody picked up, and tomorrow is the deadline, so I—" He stopped and swallowed hard. "I've been waiting here since 9 o'clock. August looked at him. He said nothing. In that silence, the middle-aged man began to tremble. And then he kept talking on his own, faster now, as though he were afraid that if he stopped, there wouldn't be another chance. "I have 22,000. I've managed to put together 22,000. I'm still short 48,000. But the printing plant is making its final payment this March. I swear to you, I'll have it. I've never run from you for a single day, Mr. Ferraro. Not in 11 years. You can ask anyone." August still said nothing. He stood there with both hands in the pockets of his wool coat, looking at the man the way someone might look at a report. Then he spoke, and his voice was so quiet that the middle-aged man had to tilt his head to hear him. "How's your wife's bakery doing this month?" The man froze. His hands were still buried in his coat pockets, and now they weren't trembling anymore, because his whole body had gone rigid. You know about the bakery. Salem Street. Opens at 5 in the morning. She makes better almond pastries than either of the two places across from her. August said it without raising his voice, without stressing a single word. She hired another person in November, had to let that person go in December. The middle-aged man couldn't answer. He looked down at the pavement. "That's why you're short $48,000, August said. "Not because of the printing plant." The parking lot held nothing but the sound of wind slipping through the narrow space between the two buildings. The middle-aged man gave the smallest nod, and when he looked up, his eyes were already rimmed with red. "I couldn't tell you about that. I was afraid you'd think I was making excuses." "You were right to be afraid," August said, but lying made it worse. He stood there a while longer. The driver inside the car had lowered the window halfway and was waiting. The broad-shouldered man stood 3 steps away, perfectly still. 60 days, August said. The middle-aged man blinked. "What?" 60 days, no additional interest. He pulled his hand from his coat pocket, and for 1 second the other man flinched and stepped back half a pace. But August only adjusted the collar of his coat. "April 15th. Don't make me remember that date." The middle-aged man stood there, not knowing what to do with his hands. He started saying thank you, then said it again, then a third time, and his voice broke on the third. August had already turned away before he could finish. "Go home. Your wife is waiting." The car door closed. Inside, it was warm and dark, and the familiar scent of leather wrapped around him. Fen Dolan sat in the seat across from him, phone in hand, and had been waiting for quite some time. "You just gave Renzo Batali another 60 days, Fen said. 4 people on the council will know about this before morning." August said nothing. "The council meets Thursday," Fen continued. "Brand has brought the proposal for Pier 7 back. 3rd time already. This time he's got Marchetti and Lazari standing with him." August looked out through the window. The front of Kestrel had gone dark, leaving only the yellow light spilling out through the rear kitchen door. 20 years ago, every Sunday morning, a man used to bring him there and sit at that very corner table. Back then, the two of them would still go home with the smell of machine oil and sea salt clinging to their clothes, and that man always ordered 2 plates of eggs, always left the change for the waitress, and always told his son that some things weren't for sale, no matter how much someone was willing to pay. 20 years ago, and this February 14th would mark the 15-year he'd come sit there alone on the exact night that man never came home. "August," Fen called. "Thursday. You need to prepare." He kept looking through the window. What filled his mind wasn't Pier 7, wasn't Brand, wasn't the 3 votes leaning the wrong way. What filled his mind was a very calm voice, saying that people only sit for 3 hours without touching anything when they're hiding from something. And an address. 3rd floor. Door on the left. The doorbell had been broken for 3 years. "Go to Prince Street," he said. The driver looked up at him in the mirror. "Sir?" August Ferraro kept looking out through the window. "Turn left." The red brick building on the corner of Prince Street had 4 floors and no elevator. August climbed the stairs, his left leg moving 1 step slower than his right with every stair, while the broad-shouldered man followed 3 steps behind him until August stopped at the 2nd floor landing and gave a slight shake of his head. The other man stepped back down, sat on the stairs, and went no farther. On the 3rd floor, the door on the left had a worn doormat and a wilted potted plant sitting beside it. August knocked. He knocked hard, exactly as she'd told him to. Footsteps sounded inside. Then the door opened, and a young man stood there with a hand towel draped over his shoulder. He looked at August, then he looked down at the black wool coat, then back up at that face, and his whole body went rigid. "Marin," he called inside, his eyes never leaving the man standing in front of the door. "Sis, what is it?" Her voice came from the kitchen, mixed with the sound of a pot knocking against the gas stove. There's a guest," Wesley Vane said, his voice rising half a note. Marin stepped out, still holding a wooden spoon in her hand. She looked at August, standing in the doorway, and what he would remember for years afterward was that she didn't look surprised at all. She didn't gape, didn't step back, didn't raise a hand to smooth her hair. She simply looked at him for 1 second, then turned back inside. "Wesley, get the extra chair from the balcony. Sis." The young man lowered his voice until it was barely more than a whisper. "Do you know who's standing at our door?" "Yes," she said, still without turning around. "The chair, Wesley." The apartment was small, and August realized that the moment he stepped inside, not because it was cramped, but because everything in it had been arranged so that not a single inch was wasted. The dining table was pushed against the wall on 3 sides, with the 4th side pressed up against the window. Wesley brought the plastic chair in from the balcony, wiped it with the towel over his shoulder, set it down, then picked it up again and shifted it to the other side before finally leaving it where it was. He sat across from August and didn't know what to do with his hands. Dinner was pasta with ground meat, a plate of mixed vegetables, and sliced bread in a plastic basket. Marin served 3 equal portions and sat down. "This is how we eat at home," she said. "There's nothing else." "I know how to eat pasta," August replied. Wesley laughed, then quickly pressed his lips together. He managed 3 bites before he couldn't hold it in anymore. "Are you really August Ferraro?" "Wesley," Marin said. "It's all right." August put his fork down. "Yes." "So is it true you own that restaurant on Hanover Street? The one that always has 2 men standing outside the door?" "Yes." "And what about the story that you once made an entire block go silent just by walking through it?" "Wesley," Marin said again. "People like to tell stories," August said. "Most of them are made up." The young man nodded thoughtfully, chewed, then looked up again. "What about your leg? You walk a little crooked. Were you shot?" The entire table went silent. Marin set her glass of water down a little too hard. "Wesley Vane." "No," August said, and he said it so calmly that both brother and sister turned to look at him. "When I was 20, I worked at the docks. A 4-ton load slipped from a crane line. I moved half a second too slowly." Wesley's mouth fell open. "You used to work down at the docks?" "6 years. And I always thought you were the kind of man who was just born." He waved one hand vaguely through the air. "You know, nobody is born that way," August said. He picked up his fork again. "Not even the people who want you to think they are." Marin looked at him across the table, and for the first time that evening, something shifted in her eyes. Dinner continued, and Wesley talked about the community college, where he was in his 2nd year studying electrical engineering, about the instructor who kept calling him by the wrong name all semester, and about how he was planning to apply for a part-time job at the auto repair shop at the end of the street. Then he reached for the last slice of bread and said, completely naturally, without thinking about it, "Oh, sis, did you take your stomach medicine? You forgot again yesterday, and you have to eat first before you take it. That's what the doctor told you." Marin didn't answer immediately. "I took it." "When?" "Wesley, I'm asking seriously. The day before yesterday you said you'd eaten at the diner, so you didn't eat at home. And yesterday you said the same thing. And today when I got home, the meal I saved for you has still been sitting in the refrigerator since Monday." He finished speaking only to realize that the whole table had gone silent. He looked at his sister, then he looked down at his plate. "I'm sorry." Marin smiled, and the smile came quickly, at exactly the right moment, neat and effortless like a door quietly closing. "I work nights, so my schedule gets all mixed up, that's all. Eat." But August had already seen it. He'd seen it before the young man had even finished speaking. He saw the portion of pasta on her plate, slightly smaller than the other 2, just small enough that no one would notice unless they were looking for it. He saw the little refrigerator in the corner of the kitchen, with a sheet of paper taped to the door, listing the medication schedule in the handwriting of someone who had once worked in the medical field. He saw the 3 prescription bottles lined up neatly on top of the refrigerator, and he could read the label on the middle one. That medication wasn't cheap. Without insurance, it was even worse. All his life, he'd sat across from men who knew how to hide everything, except one thing, and he'd learned how to recognize that one thing before they ever opened their mouths. The woman who'd invited him into her home that night, the woman who'd simply made room for him at her table without asking for anything in return, hadn't eaten dinner for 3 days. August didn't say a word. He simply picked up the basket of bread, set it down in front of her, and kept eating. August woke at 6:15 and needed exactly 4 seconds to realize that the ceiling above him wasn't his own. The sofa was at least 2 handspans shorter than he was, and during the night, He'd had to prop his legs over the armrest in a position no 34-year-old man should ever have to accept. A thin, faded wool blanket, folded double, covered him, and someone had laid his black wool coat neatly across the back of the chair. He didn't remember when he'd fallen asleep. He only remembered that well past midnight, after Wesley had gone to his room, he was still sitting at the table against the wall, listening to a woman talk about things no one had ever told him, without attaching a demand to the end of it. Water was running in the kitchen, and the smell of coffee drifted through the apartment. He sat up, and his left leg told him very clearly what it thought of that sofa. Sleep well? Marin stood in the kitchen, her hair tied low, a coffee pot in her hand. I survived, he said. The chair might have grounds for a lawsuit. It was my grandmother's chair. She was 5 feet tall. Don't blame it. She poured him a cup and set it on the table. You snore. I don't snore. The walls in this building are as thin as paper, Mr. Ferraro. The whole building heard you. He picked up the coffee and didn't answer, and she saw the corner of his mouth move just slightly, and that was the closest thing to a smile she would see from him for many months. Wesley had already left for school at 6, leaving a hurried note on the table reminding his sister to eat breakfast. Marin folded the note, slipped it into the pocket of her apron, then sat down across from him. Morning light poured through the window, and in that light he could clearly see the scar running along her left forearm, from her wrist nearly to her elbow, where the sleeve of her sweater had been pushed up. She saw him looking. She didn't pull the sleeve down. 3 years ago, she said. Along with a few other things. He didn't ask. He simply waited. And perhaps it was because he didn't ask that she finally told him. I used to be a nurse. 7 years. Emergency department at St. Anselm Hospital. Night shift. She turned the cup slowly in her hands. Then there was a wrong medical record. A patient nearly died because of that dosage. There was an investigation, and 3 weeks later there was a signature of mine on the medication order that I'd never signed. You spoke up about it. I told everyone who was willing to listen. I talked about it for 4 months. She shrugged, and the shrug was more bitter than anything else she could have said. Then they gave me an agreement. Sign it. Stay quiet. Take a payment. Voluntarily surrender my license. If I didn't sign, it went to court. And if it went to court, I couldn't afford a lawyer. And at the time, Wesley had just... She stopped. At the time, I needed money immediately. So I signed. Where's the money now? Gone a long time ago. Hospital bills don't wait for anyone. She said it as calmly as if she were reading from a price list. August set his cup down. For 20 years, he'd sat across from people who'd been driven into a corner, and he knew that look, the face of someone who knew they'd been wronged but had stopped expecting anyone to believe them. That expression wasn't angry. It was simply tired. So now you work nights at the restaurant. Now I work nights at the restaurant. She stood, opened the drawer beneath the sink, took out an old hardbound notebook, and placed it on the table. She opened it. Inside were pages crowded with handwriting, columns of numbers, rough floor plans sketched in pencil. 2 buildings down on Prince Street. There's a vacant storefront that's been empty since the winter before last. 300 square feet, its own bathroom, 3-phase electrical outlets. Her voice changed. Faster now, warmer. There are nearly 4,000 people in this neighborhood without insurance. They don't see a doctor until someone has to call an ambulance, and by then it's too late and costs 10 times as much. It could be a small place. Blood pressure checks, blood sugar tests, bandage changes, medication counseling, no paperwork, no charge. She turned another page, then suddenly stopped and closed the notebook. I'm sorry. You don't need to hear this. Why haven't you done it? She was silent for a long time. Because I don't have a license. I don't have the money. And I don't have anyone willing to stand behind me. Then she continued, more quietly. And because if I try and fail, then everyone who's ever told me I should just let it go will be right. And everyone will say, I told you so. I think I can handle a lot of things, but that one, I'm not sure. August said nothing. He made no promises. He didn't say he'd help her, didn't tell her she could do it, didn't offer any of the words a wealthy man might use to buy someone else's gratitude cheaply. He simply finished his coffee, stood, put on his coat, and walked to the door. At the threshold, he stopped. He turned back, and Marin saw him looking toward the dining table pressed against the wall, where there had been 3 plates the night before, and a plastic chair brought in from the balcony. I owe you a meal, he said. Then he closed the door and walked down the 3 flights of stairs, where the broad-shouldered man had been waiting at the bottom for the entire night. Ferraro's on Hanover Street closed to customers every Thursday afternoon, just as it had every Thursday afternoon for 40 years. The downstairs was silent, chairs turned upside down on the tables. The wooden staircase led up to the dining room on the second floor, where there was one long table and 7 chairs, and where for 20 years no server had been allowed to step inside once the door was closed. August reached the final step at 5 minutes before 4. He pushed the door open. 6 people in the room stood. They didn't rise all at once, but in an order that had become a habit. Uncle Conrad first, then Marchetti, then Lazari, then the other 3, and all of them remained standing until August took his seat at the head of the table. Only one man didn't stand. Brand Ferraro sat in the 3rd chair on the left, both hands resting on the tabletop, and he stared straight at his cousin, while the other 6 men stood around him. No one said anything about it. No one needed to. In that room, one man refusing to rise was a statement longer than any speech could have been. Conrad Ferraro was the last to sit, and the 66-year-old man gave his nephew one quick glance before opening the leather ledger in front of him. "Get to it." Brand didn't wait for the second item. "Pier 7, he said. "I'm bringing it back for the 3rd time, and this time I brought the numbers." He pushed a stack of papers down the length of the table. 9 million. Not once. 9 million a year for the first 3 years, and they'll pay 30% up front the moment we sign. We don't have to touch the cargo. We don't have to store it. We don't have to know what's in the crates. We just open the gate. "We know what's in the crates," August said. "We guess. We know." Brand leaned back. "Do you know how much the Cavallo family made at Pier 9 last year? Do you know why we've had 3 of our men leave for them every week? Because they pay twice as much, while we're still collecting small loans from those bakeries on Salem Street like it's the days when grandfather was alive. Grandfather died after being shot in that very bakery," Conrad said without looking up. "Watch your mouth." Brand didn't answer his uncle. He kept his eyes on August. "The North End is shrinking, cousin. Year by year. You can keep following your father's rules if you want, but those rules are making this family poorer." August remained silent. He let the silence stretch long enough for everyone in the room to hear the traffic moving along Hanover Street below. Then he spoke, and his voice was so quiet that Marchetti at the far end of the table had to lean forward to catch it. "What passes through our gate ends up in the hands of the children of the people who pay us every month 2 weeks later." That was all he said. He didn't add another word. Brand smiled, but the smile never reached his eyes. "Then let's vote." Conrad looked up. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." The upstairs dining room at Ferraro's had a rule that had existed before August was born, and everyone who sat at that table knew it by heart. The man at the head made the decisions, but the 7-member council had the right to enter an objection into the record, and once an objection was recorded, it never disappeared. It remained there, in Conrad Ferraro's leather ledger, waiting for the day it gathered 4 signatures and became a vote to remove the man in charge. Conrad picked up his pen. "All those in favor of opening Pier 7. Brand raised his hand. Marchetti raised his, a beat later, without looking toward the head of the table. Lazari raised his hand. Then, after a silence so long that Brand finally turned his head to look, the 4th man raised his hand. It was Sal Peretti, 61 years old, the man who had once carried August in his arms when he was too young to walk. The old man lifted his hand and stared straight down at the table. 4, Conrad said. He wrote the number down. 4 votes recorded against the decision of the man in charge. He closed the ledger. The decision remains unchanged. Pier 7 stays closed. Brand stood before Conrad could declare the meeting over. He fastened the buttons of his suit jacket again, slowly, and when he passed the head of the table, he stopped for 1 second. 4 votes. August. You know what 4 means. Then he walked out. One by one, the others left the room, and at last only Conrad and August remained. The old man stood, bracing one hand against the back of his chair. Sal Peretti, he said, do you understand now? I understand. No, you don't. Sal doesn't need money. 70% of Sal's assets are in rental properties. Conrad looked at his nephew. Sal raised his hand, because Sal thinks you're going to lose, and Sal doesn't want to be on the wrong side when that happens. That's the part that should scare you. The old man walked out, leaving the leather ledger on the table. At the bottom of the stairs, in the narrow hallway leading to the restaurant's back exit, Brand Ferraro stood smoking a cigarette and wasn't in any hurry. Fen Dolan walked past, carrying his coat. "Fen," Brand called. The advisor stopped. "The 14th, Brand said, his eyes still fixed on the glowing tip of the cigarette. "He sits at that diner like he does every year. Then the car doesn't get back to the garage until 2 in the morning. From Kestrel to his house is 11 minutes. He looked up. "Where is he for those 3 hours? Fen Dolan stood still. 44 years old, 20 years spent sitting at the upstairs table. The only outsider by blood ever allowed to sit there. He looked down at the coat in his hands. Then he answered. "Prince Street, the red brick apartment building on the corner, 3rd floor. Brand drew in a long breath of smoke. "Thank you," he said. 6 weeks passed before he repaid that debt. He texted her 3 times during those 6 weeks. Messages so short that Wesley had to snatch the phone from his sister's hand just to read them, then declared that the man wrote text messages like he was sending wartime telegrams. At the end of March, he asked her where she wanted to eat. She texted back that anywhere was fine, as long as the meal didn't cost more than Wesley's medication for a week. He chose a seafood restaurant down at the harbor, where the tables and chairs were made of pine and guests were handed paper bibs for eating lobster, a place where August Ferraro had been eating lunch since back when he was hauling cargo at Pier 4. Marin arrived on time, wearing a dark blue sweater and jeans, her sleeves rolled up as usual. She looked at the paper bib, looked at him, then tied it around her neck. "You know, I always thought a man like you only ate in places with white tablecloths and waiters who stood 3 steps away." "I do," he said. "The food's worse there." She laughed, and the sound made 2 people at the next table turn around. Lunch lasted longer than either of them had expected. She told him how Wesley had failed his electrical circuits course the first time, then retaken it, and earned the highest grade in the class, and how he'd celebrated by buying his sister a box of almond pastries from the bakery on Salem Street. August said nothing when he heard the name, but he set his fork down for a moment. She asked whether he'd ever eaten lobster without utensils, and he cracked a claw open with his bare hands in 3 seconds, and she told him that was the most frightening thing she'd ever seen a man do at a dinner table. By the time coffee arrived, neither of them remembered where they were sitting anymore. Then a voice came from beside the table. August. What a surprise. Theodora Vance was 33, with dark blonde hair pulled neatly back, and she wore the kind of clothes people wore when they wanted everyone to know exactly where they'd just come from. She stood there with a perfect smile, one hand resting lightly on the back of August's chair. "My father mentioned you this morning. He said it's been a long time since you stopped by." "Teddy," August said. Just one word. Her gaze shifted to Marin, and it stayed there longer than courtesy allowed. "And this is—" "Marin Hollis," Marin said. "Marin." Teddy Vance repeated the name as though she were tasting something unfamiliar. "What do you do, Marin?" "I work the night shift at a diner on Salem Street." "Oh." The smile remained perfectly in place. How admirable. Truly. August has always been like this. He has this very charming habit of finding people who need to be helped. She turned toward him. "Do you remember the paper boy whose tuition you paid for 4 years? And that family on Endicott Street, too. He has quite the collection." Then her eyes lowered, very naturally, and stopped exactly where Marin's left forearm was exposed. "Oh my God, were you burned?" The table beside them went silent. That must have been terribly painful. Teddy Vance continued, her voice overflowing with sympathy. "Have you ever considered cosmetic treatment? They can fade almost all of it now. I know a very good doctor in Back Bay. It's just that, you know, if you plan to go with him to crowded places." Marin didn't pull her sleeve down. She set her coffee cup on the table, very gently. 3 years ago, I pulled 2 people out of a burning apartment before the fire department arrived," she said. "I didn't get to the 3rd person in time, and that was the man I swore to spend my life with. This scar is what I brought home from the night I lost him." She looked directly at Teddy Vance. "Some scars are visible, some aren't. Looking at you, I'd guess you carry the 2nd kind, and I'd guess they hurt a lot more." Teddy Vance blinked. Her smile didn't disappear, but it stiffened, and for 2 full seconds no one at that table said a word. Marin turned to August. She waited. And August Ferraro, a man who had never in his life needed to say anything twice, a man who could walk into a room of 7 people and make every one of them stand, hesitated. Half a second. Exactly half a second. In that half second, he thought of old Mr. Vance in Providence. Thought of the 4 votes in Conrad's leather ledger. Thought of how one sentence at this table could become a phone call by morning. He opened his mouth, but the half-second was already gone. Maren had seen it. She took her wallet from her coat pocket, counted out a few bills, and placed them on the table beside her plate. My share. She stood, untied the paper bib, folded it in half, and laid it on the chair. Thank you for the meal, Mr. Ferraro. I've learned a lot. She walked toward the door. He stood, but she was already outside, and through the glass he watched her cross the street without looking back even once. He remained standing there. Teddy Vance adjusted the strap of her handbag. Come on, August. You'll be thanking me 6 months from now. He turned to look at her. He didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice. Your father borrowed $294,000 from my father. He said it so quietly that only she could hear. My father never asked for it back. I've never mentioned it either. He picked up his coat. Don't make me remember that, Teddy. He walked out the door, and Theodora Vance remained alone in the restaurant, her face drained of color, her hand still gripping the back of the empty chair. She didn't answer. He called 7 times over 4 days, and by the 4th call, the phone no longer rang and went straight to voicemail. And August Ferraro realized that in 34 years of life, this was the first time anyone had blocked his number. He wasn't used to that. He wasn't used to counting the number of times he called, either. On the 4th day, Boston was hit by the last snowstorm of winter, one of those late March blizzards that arrived when no one was prepared, and by 9 that evening, all of Prince Street was white and silent. The black car stopped at the corner. The driver started to open the door, but August signaled for him to stay put. He walked the final 20 yards alone, carrying nothing in his hands. No flowers, no gift box, nothing that could be bought. He climbed 3 flights of stairs and knocked. There were footsteps inside. The door opened only a hand's width, and Maren Hollis stood there, still wearing the dark blue sweater, her hair tied low, looking at him through the narrow opening with the expression of someone who'd rehearsed these words many times. I'm not letting you in. August didn't move. Then I'll stand here. The door closed. The 3rd-floor hallway of the red brick building had no heat. There was a window at the end of the hall with one corner cracked, and wind had been blowing through it all winter, and the old woman in apartment 7 had complained to the landlord for 3 years without anyone fixing it. August stood 2 steps from the door, both hands in the pockets of his coat, and he stood there. 10 minutes passed. The television inside turned on, then went silent. 20 minutes. The door of the apartment across the hall opened slightly, then closed again almost immediately. 30 minutes. His left leg began to complain, the place where 4 tons of cargo had passed over him when he was 20, and whenever the weather turned cold, it always remembered the old injury. He shifted his weight onto his right leg and kept standing. At 40 minutes, the door opened. Maren stood there, and this time she opened it all the way. Are you crazy? Maybe. Come in. Before the neighbors call the police because there's a strange man standing in the hallway for 40 minutes. It was warm inside. Wesley wasn't home. She didn't invite him to sit, and he didn't sit either. The 2 of them stood facing each other in the small kitchen, separated by exactly the length of the dining table pressed against the wall. I'm listening, she said. You have 3 minutes. August looked down at his hands. He'd sat across from men who wanted him dead without ever feeling his mouth go dry, and now his mouth was dry. You think I stayed silent because I was ashamed of you? I don't think. I saw it. You saw the part you saw, he said. But you guessed wrong about the rest. He looked up. When Teddy said that thing, the part about the collection, I wasn't thinking about you. I was thinking about me. Maren said nothing. When I was 19, my father died. 3 weeks after the funeral, 14 people came to see me. 14. Every one of them said they were there because they cared about the old man. He spoke slowly, like a man having to pull each word out from somewhere very deep. By the 14th person, I understood that none of them had come because they cared. They came because the chair was empty. He paused. From that day until now, whenever someone is kind to me, my mind automatically asks one question. What do they want? That question comes before I have time to think. It's been running for 15 years. And that night, it ran toward me, she said. No, he said, and for the first time that evening, his voice broke slightly in the middle of the word. It didn't run toward you. It ran toward me. In that half second, I wasn't afraid you were the kind of person Teddy said you were. I was afraid that if you weren't that kind of person, then I had no reason for someone like you to stay. The kitchen went silent. Outside, snow struck the window in waves. You invited me into your home on the night of February 14th, he said. You brought a plastic chair in from the balcony. You gave me food from the portion you yourself had gone without for 3 days to save. And you never asked me for a thing. He looked at her. I didn't know what to do with that, Marin. I don't have a reflex for something like that. She stood still for a long time. Then she pulled out a chair, sat down, and nodded toward the chair across from her. Sit. He sat. Do you know what the most frightening thing you just said was? She asked. It wasn't the story about those 14 people. It's that you think you need a reason before you're worth having someone stay. She pushed the glass of water toward him. People don't stay because there's a reason. They stay because they want to. He picked up the glass and didn't drink. Next time, she said. If there is a next time, you don't need to defend me. I can defend myself, but don't stay silent. Silence is what I've been listening to for 3 years at that hospital. I won't stay silent. Outside, the snow kept falling. 40 minutes earlier, he'd been standing in the cold hallway, and now he was sitting in the little kitchen, and neither of them knew that in another room somewhere else in the city, a man had just laid a photograph of the red brick building on the corner of Prince Street down on a table. That happened on a Tuesday morning in early April, when she was sitting in his car on the way home after her night shift, and asked him a question she'd been holding in her mind for 6 weeks. What do you do for a living? He didn't answer right away. He looked out through the window for a long moment, and Marin was about to take the question back when he turned toward her. Come with me, and you'll see. The driver glanced quickly into the mirror. Fen Dolan, sitting in the front seat, turned his whole body around. August. Go to Pier 4. Later, when everything had fallen apart and been built back up again, August Ferraro would still think of that morning as the day he'd opened a door with his own hands that should have been left alone. But at the time, he was thinking about something very simple, that this woman had invited him into her home, and he had never invited her into anything. The warehouse at Pier 4 was as tall as a 4-story building, and colder than outside. When August stepped inside, the forklift engines stopped. Not all at once, but one after another, this one and then the next, like a wave moving backward from the door toward the far end. 40 men in the warehouse turned around. No one greeted him. No one needed to. Marin walked half a step behind him, and she could feel that silence settling against her skin. 2 crews stood facing each other in the middle of the main aisle, and between them were 17 shipments that hadn't yet been stacked. A gray-haired man stepped forward. Mr. Ferraro. Talk, Gino. The gray-haired man spoke for 4 minutes. He told him about the Friday night shift, about his crew being shorted 4 hours of pay, about the timesheet being altered. He spoke quickly, pointing toward the stack of papers in the other man's hands. August listened. He didn't interrupt him once. Then he turned to the other crew leader, a man around 40 with hunched shoulders, named Dwayne. Talk. Dwayne spoke for 6 minutes. He said the timesheet hadn't been altered at all, that Gino's crew had left early, and that he himself had stayed behind to lock the warehouse. He spoke louder than necessary, and at the end he repeated his final sentence twice. August still listened. When both men had gone silent, he stood there for another 5 seconds or so. Then he spoke. Pay Gino's crew the full 4 hours, including the night shift differential. Starting next week, both crew leaders sign the timesheets together. No one signs alone. That was it. No explanation. No asking whether anyone agreed. Gino nodded and stepped back. Dwayne opened his mouth as though he wanted to say something, then stopped. The forklift engines started again, one by one, and within 2 minutes, the warehouse was moving as though nothing had happened. Marin stood there thinking she'd just witnessed something she would never forget. And she didn't yet know that the part she'd never forget hadn't happened yet. They were halfway to the door when Fen Dolan caught up with them, a stack of papers in his hand. He handed them to August and said something very quietly. August stopped. He turned 2 pages. Then he turned around. Dwayne. The hunched man came forward. He walked slowly, and with every step he seemed to grow slower. August didn't say anything. He simply looked at him. He looked for so long that the man began to speak, even though no one had asked him to. Mr. Ferraro, I can explain. That sheet, my cousin was the one who wrote it. I wasn't there when... August kept looking. I was there, Dwayne said. His voice grew quieter. My wife just had a baby. I needed the extra hours. I only meant to do it once. The warehouse went silent. 30 yards away, a man standing on a forklift had shut off the engine so he could listen. August turned to Fendolan. He doesn't work at this port anymore. 7 words. Dwayne stood there, his face turning white, and Marin watched the exact moment he understood what those words meant. It didn't look like a man being fired. It looked like a man hearing a sentence. August had already turned away and was walking toward the door. In the car, Marin said nothing for 4 blocks. Then she turned toward him. You just ruined a man's life with 7 words. Yes. His wife just had a baby. I know, he said. I know his wife's name. I know his mother was in the hospital last January and who paid for it. He kept his eyes straight ahead. He knew I knew. That's why he thought he could do it. Then why didn't you give him a chance? You gave the man in the parking lot on February 14th another 60 days. He turned to look at her, and she realized he wasn't surprised that she knew about that. Renzo Batali owed money. Money can be repaid, he said. Dwayne didn't owe money. He took 4 hours of pay from 11 other men and signed his own name to it. He needed the money. They all need the money, Marin. Every one of those 40 men in that warehouse. He spoke quietly, and he never raised his voice. And that was exactly what made a chill run down her spine. If I forgive him, next week there'll be a 2nd man. Next month, a 5th. And 6 months from now, no one will trust those timesheets anymore. And when people stop trusting the paperwork, they start taking things back another way. Do you know what the other way is? Marin didn't answer. The other way is 2 men waiting for each other in a parking lot at 11 at night, he said. The other way is someone not making it home. The car turned onto Prince Street. 7 words. August Ferraro said. Or the other way. Which one do you want me to choose? And for the first time since that night on February 14th at Kestrel, when the woman who dared to ask him in an empty restaurant whether he really intended to sit there all by himself, she couldn't find a single word to answer him. On April 18th, 2 envelopes were opened at opposite ends of the city, less than an hour apart. The first lay on the long table in the upstairs dining room at Ferraro's. Conrad Ferraro pushed it along the length of the table toward the head before the meeting had even begun, before Marchetti had even had time to sit down. Open it. August opened it. Inside were 14 pages. The first page was a copy of the Massachusetts State Nursing License Revocation Order, bearing the name Marin Elizabeth Hollis. The 4th page was the settlement agreement with St. Anselm Hospital, the signature section blacked out. The 9th page was an outstanding medical debt statement for Wesley Vane, with the final figure underlined twice. The 12th page was a photograph of a red brick building on the corner of Prince Street, taken from across the street at night. No one in the room said a word. You know who gave this to me? Conrad asked. I know. Then you also know I'm not the only one who received it. The old man folded his hands on the tabletop. For 3 days now, I've heard that name in 4 different places. 2 of them weren't even our people. He looked at his nephew. August, I don't care where you sleep. I don't care who you have dinner with. I've lived my whole life in this neighborhood, and I've never asked anyone that question. He tapped his finger against the stack of papers. But this is different. This is a name with an address, a schedule, a younger brother, a debt, and an old story someone can drag into the light whenever they want. He paused. The man sitting in that chair cannot have something like this, son. Your father understood that. He married your mother when he was 39, after everything had settled down. My father died at 49, August said, and everything still hadn't settled down. The whole table went silent. No one in that room had ever heard him mention his father's death there. Not once in 15 years. Conrad slowly leaned back. So what are you going to do? I'm going to do my job. I'm asking you again, clearly. The old man's voice hardened. Are you leaving her? And August Ferraro did something he had never done in 20 years of sitting in that room. He stood. No, he said, and this is the last time you'll ask me that at this table. Marchetti looked down at the table. Lazzari looked out the window. Sal Peretti, 61 years old, the man who had once carried August in his arms, didn't look away at all. He stared straight at August, and there was something in the old man's eyes that looked almost like regret. At the other end of the table, Brand Ferraro lifted his glass of water and took a sip to hide the corner of his mouth. The second envelope was opened at 11 that morning, in the small kitchen on the 3rd floor of the red brick building. In fact, there were 2. The first bore the seal of the Massachusetts Board of Nursing. Inside was a notice that a complaint had been filed, along with a case number and a request that Maren Hollis provide a written explanation within 21 days regarding the practice of professional medical services without a valid license. 3 color photographs were enclosed. Photographs of a folding table at the South Boston Flea Market. Maren sitting behind the table, a blood pressure cuff in her hand. A handwritten sign standing beside her. The photograph was clear enough to read every word on that sign. No paperwork, no charge. Maren placed the 3 photographs on the table and sat there silently for a long time. The second envelope was a letter from a collections company in Quincy she'd never heard of. It stated that the entire outstanding medical debt in Wesley Vane's name had been transferred from St. Anselm Hospital to the company on April 11th. The letter said that the previous installment agreement was no longer valid. It demanded full payment within 30 days. She read it a second time, then a third. Then she did what 7 years of working night shifts in an emergency department had taught her to do whenever everything began collapsing at once. She sat up straight and thought in order. The flea market table she'd been running for 14 months. 14 months, and no one had taken a photograph. No one had filed a complaint. She'd been making regular payments on that debt for 31 months, never missing a single installment, and the hospital had never once mentioned selling the debt. The 2 things had nothing to do with each other, were being handled by different agencies, by different parties, and had both arrived on the same morning. She looked up at the calendar, taped to the refrigerator door. Then she stood, walked to the window, and looked across the street, directly toward the corner where someone had stood to photograph this building that night. This wasn't aimed at her. She was simply the softest place on another man's body. Wesley came home at noon, tossed his backpack onto the chair, and asked what they were having for lunch. Maren had already folded both letters and slipped them beneath the hardbound notebook in the drawer under the sink. "Pasta," she said. "Go wash your hands." He knew before she ever told him. He came that afternoon without warning, and when she opened the door, he was already holding a printed sheet of paper, and on that paper was the name of the collections company in Quincy. "Who gave you this?" "That doesn't matter. It matters to me," she said, "because if you knew before I did, then it means someone deliberately made sure you knew." August didn't answer. He placed the paper on the table, sat down in the plastic chair brought in from the balcony, and pulled his phone from the inside pocket of his coat. "This company belongs to a man named Nardi. He has 3 warehouses in Everett, and all 3 lease their land through me." He tapped the screen. 3 minutes. That debt disappears. Maren looked at the phone in his hand. Then she reached out, placed her hand around his wrist, and held it there. "No. Maren. No." She said it again. He looked up. In 34 years, no one had ever placed a hand around his wrist like that, and no one had ever said no to him twice within 4 seconds. "In 30 days they'll come to take your home." "I know. You know, and you're still saying no. Listen to me all the way through first." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, and she still hadn't released his wrist. 3 years ago, someone put a paper in front of me and told me that if I signed it, everything would be over. I signed it, and I've been paying that price for 3 years with my profession. She spoke slowly. "Now you pick up your phone and 3 minutes later that debt disappears. Where does it go, August? It doesn't disappear. It moves from me to you. And from that second on, I'm no longer the woman who invited you home for dinner." She let go of his wrist. "I become your woman. You think I'd ask for it back? I don't think you would," she said. "But I would know. Every time I sat across from you at this table, I'd know I was sitting there with someone else's money under me, and you can't erase that, not even in 3 minutes." August sat in silence. He stared at the phone in his hand for a long time, then slipped it back into the inside pocket of his coat. "So what are you going to do?" "I'm going to do what I've been doing for 3 years," she said. "I'll work extra shifts. I'll write my response to the board. I'll borrow wherever I can without letting someone bleed me dry with interest. I'll fight. If I lose, I'll lose the right way." She stood and went to pour herself a glass of water. "I'm not good at many things, August, but I'm very good at standing on my own feet. That's the one thing they haven't taken from me." He stayed another 40 minutes. They didn't say anything more about the 2 letters. She told him Wesley had been accepted for an internship at an electrical shop in Dorchester, and he told her that Renzo Batali had paid off his debt 11 days early, and brought over a box of almond pastries that no one had dared to eat because they didn't know whether they were supposed to accept it. She laughed. He left at 6. At the threshold, he stopped just as he had the time before, and she waited for him to say something. But this time, he only looked at her once and walked away. She stood at the window and watched the black car until it turned off Prince Street. Then she went back into the kitchen, sat down, and remained there for exactly 1 hour without doing anything. She thought about the 14 pages. She hadn't seen them, but she knew they existed because she knew how people worked this way. She thought about the photograph of this building, taken from across the street. She thought about how many men in this city were sitting somewhere, reading her name, her brother's debt, and thinking that this was the softest place on August Ferraro's body. And she understood one very simple thing that she'd spent the whole afternoon trying not to think about. As long as she remained there, they would have somewhere to press. That night, Maren Hollis worked her final shift at Kestrel Diner. She wiped down every table, turned the chairs upside down, shut off the lights in front, and left the leftover food by the back door as she had every night for 3 years. Then she took a sheet of paper from the receipt pad, wrote a few lines, folded it in half, and wrote his name on the outside. She gave it to the owner and told him that if a man in a black wool coat came asking for it, he should give it to him. The next morning, she took a shift at a diner in Dorchester, 9 blocks away, with different hours and a different bus route. 3 days later, August came to Kestrel. The owner handed him the folded paper. He went out to the car, sat down, turned on the overhead light, and opened it. There were 4 lines inside. She wrote that she wasn't angry with him. She wrote that what happened wasn't his fault. She wrote that as long as she stood beside him, people would know where to press, and she didn't want to be that place. The last line was only a few words. "Don't come looking for me." August Ferraro folded the paper, slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat, and sat in the car for a very long time. Wesley found the 2 letters on the 11th day, when he was rummaging through the drawer beneath the sink looking for a roll of electrical tape. The hardbound notebook was on top, and beneath it were 2 sheets of paper folded into quarters. He sat down on the kitchen floor and read both of them, reading every word, including the small print at the bottom of the pages. At 9 that evening, Maren came home, and he was already sitting at the dining table waiting for her. The 2 letters spread open in front of him. "How long were you planning to hide this from me?" She set her bag down. "Wesley, 30 days. You have 19 days left, and you were planning to not tell me a single word." His voice trembled. "That money is my hospital debt. Do you understand?" "Mine. I understand. Then I'm dropping out." She stood motionless in the middle of the kitchen. "Mr. Rossi at the electrical shop in Dorchester said, if I work full-time, I can make $19 an hour. And if I pick up weekend shifts too, then..." He pulled out his phone as he spoke, his hands shaking so badly that it took 2 attempts to open the calculator. "I did the math. If I work 6 days a week, then in 2 years. Wesley. In 2 years I can pay back more than half. And if you keep working 2 shifts, then..." "Wesley Vane." He looked up. Maren pulled out the chair and sat across from her brother. "Listen to me once, and then let it go," she said. "When you were 17, I signed a piece of paper in exchange for money to pay for your treatment. I traded my profession for 2 years of your life in a hospital. I've never regretted that. Not for a single second." She placed her hand over the 2 papers on the table. "But if you drop out now to pay this debt, then the price I paid 3 years ago becomes meaningless. Do you understand? I gave up my profession so you could have a future. If you take that future and spend it paying a debt, then I lose both." The 20-year-old young man sat in silence. "I'm not stopping you from working weekends. But you are not leaving that school. That is the one thing I'm asking of you in this life." Wesley couldn't say anything. He stood, walked around the table, and wrapped his arms tightly around his sister, and Maren let him hold her like that for a long time, before gently patting his back and telling him to go wash his face and eat dinner. 4 days later, a man was waiting for her at the bus stop in Dorchester at 6 in the morning. He was close to 40, wearing a tailored suit, and he stood beneath the bus shelter as though he belonged there. "Miss Hollis," he said. "I'm Brand Ferraro." She didn't answer. "I know you've figured it out by now," he continued, his voice almost friendly. "You're an intelligent woman. Intelligent people can always answer the question of who is behind those 2 letters. What do you want?" "I want to give you a pleasant morning." He pulled an envelope from inside his suit jacket and held it out. Inside is confirmation that your brother's entire debt has been paid in full, signed and stamped, and a withdrawal of the complaint filed with the Board of Nursing. Both take effect today. Marin looked at the envelope. In exchange for what? A statement, Brand said. You sit down with my lawyer for 2 hours. You tell him exactly what you saw that morning at the warehouse at Pier 4. You tell him exactly what you saw. Nothing more, nothing less. A man named Dwayne lost his job in 7 words, in front of 40 witnesses, without any procedure whatsoever. He shrugged. You don't even have to lie. That's the best part. Bus Route 23 turned onto the street. I'll give you until tomorrow afternoon, Brand said. 48 hours, Miss Hollis. After that, this envelope disappears, while your 19 days keep running. Marin looked at him. Then she spoke, and her voice was so calm that even she was surprised by it. Do you know why you came here alone this morning? Brand raised an eyebrow. Because you don't dare let anyone in your own family see you doing this, she said. You came looking for a diner waitress at a bus stop at 6 in the morning. That isn't a strong man, Mr. Ferraro. That's a frightened man. She stepped onto the bus. He called after her. 19 days. The doors closed. She sat in the last row, and only after the bus had traveled 3 blocks did her hands begin to shake, and she had to grip the strap of her bag tightly to keep them still. Across the city, at the back door of Kestrel Diner, the stray dog still came at 11 each night, just as it had for the past 3 years. The new night shift waitress was a 24-year-old woman named Anna, and on her first night she asked the owner whether someone still fed the dog. The owner told her yes. The previous waitress always left some food for it, so Anna left some too. The dog didn't know the shifts had changed. It only knew that every night, at that same door, someone still remembered it. 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, the Ferraro family did better business than in any quarter of the previous 4 years. The warehouse maintenance contract in Chelsea was renewed with terms that were 11% more favorable. 2 bad debts that had been outstanding since last year were collected in full. 3 consecutive Thursday meetings ended before 4:30, with no arguments and no one having to say anything twice. The man in charge arrived on time, made decisions within seconds, and never once mentioned anything that wasn't business. On the last Thursday afternoon of May, when the upstairs dining room was empty, Fen Dolan stood at the door and watched him put his papers into his briefcase. You're doing well. Thank you. That wasn't a compliment, August. August looked up. I went to work for your father when I was 24, Fen said. I've sat in this room for 20 years. I know that look. That's the look you had during the first 3 years after your father died. He picked up his coat. You did well then, too. No one dared argue with you about anything. And during those 3 years, you didn't have dinner with anyone once. He walked toward the door. I'm just saying. June 14th was a Saturday, and there were no appointments on his schedule. August told the driver to take the day off, drove himself, and didn't head in any particular direction. He passed Pier 4, past Salem Street, crossed the bridge, and near noon he realized he was slowing down beside a flea market in South Boston, where people had set up tables along both sides of the sidewalks and were selling everything under the sun. He parked a block away and walked. He found her near the end of the row, between a pottery stand and a sandwich truck, a folding table, 2 plastic chairs, a plastic box filled with medical supplies, and beside it, a cardboard sign written in black marker. No paperwork, no charge. 4 people were waiting in line. He stood at the end of the row and watched for 20 minutes. He watched her take a blood pressure reading from an old woman, write the numbers on a small piece of paper, fold it, hand it to her, and tell her to take that paper to the neighborhood clinic and say these exact words. He watched her talk to a young man for 4 minutes, then tell him that this couldn't wait and that he needed to see a doctor that week. The man said he didn't have insurance, and she wrote down a name and a phone number and told him to call that place because they accepted people like him. When the line was gone, she looked up and saw him. She didn't stand. She didn't say anything either. August walked over, pulled out the plastic chair, and sat down in the patient's seat. He unbuttoned his cuff and rolled up the sleeve on his left arm. Take my blood pressure. She looked at him for a moment. Then she took the cuff from the box, wrapped it around his arm, and neither of them said anything for 40 seconds. 138/84, she said. Higher than in March. How many hours a night do you sleep? 4. That explains it. She removed the cuff, rolled it back up, and placed it in the box. Then she added, without looking at him, "You walked here from the end of the row. Your left foot lands shorter than your right, and you rotate your hip outward to compensate. That's not your knee joint. It's the left pelvis, the acetabulum. It was fractured and healed out of alignment. They didn't set it properly." She closed the box. "It'll hurt more after you turn 45. Swimming will help. Don't run." August looked at her. "You saw that from the end of the row." "I saw it the day you climbed 3 flights of stairs to my apartment," she said. "I just never said anything." She began folding the table. He stood and held one end for her. "Did you hear back from the board?" "Yes. They postponed the hearing until August. And the debt?" "I'm paying it," she said simply. "More slowly than they want, but I'm paying it." He didn't ask anything else. He knew she wouldn't say more, and he also knew she'd refused Brand's envelope back in April, because Brand had admitted it himself in the upstairs dining room, speaking in the voice of a man who'd lost while trying desperately to sound as though he hadn't. They carried the table to her car, an old vehicle parked at the end of the row. "July 4th, August said. She closed the trunk. "What?" "Once a year, my family has a dinner. The 7 council members, their families, and whoever else they bring. People call it the succession dinner, because it's the dinner where everyone watches who sits beside whom." He spoke slowly. "This year it's July 4th. I want you to come." Marin was silent for a long time. "You know what will happen if I come." "I know. People will talk about me, right at the table, in front of everyone." "They will. And what will you do?" August Ferraro looked straight at her. "This time, I won't be silent for half a second." The wind from the harbor moved between them. She looked at him for a long time, and he saw the moment she considered it, and the moment after that when she made her decision. "I'll come," she said, "but I'm coming as myself. No borrowed dress, no one else's jewelry, no one telling me what to say. If people can't handle that, that's their problem. That's why I'm inviting you." Ferraro's estate stood at the end of an unmarked road, and on the evening of July 4th, 31 people sat around the long table set out on the back terrace. Marin Hollis arrived at 7, wearing a moss-green dress she'd bought at a second-hand shop on Broadway, and altered around the waist herself with her grandmother's sewing machine. Short sleeves. She'd thought about that decision for 3 days, and that morning she'd decided not to wear a jacket. Her entire left forearm was bare when she walked through the door. There were whispers. A few eyes drifted downward, then quickly moved away. She walked past all of it, and sat where August pulled out her chair for her, on his right, 1 seat away from the head of the table. Dinner went on normally for 40 minutes. Then Conrad Ferraro, seated at the opposite end of the table, put down his fork. "Miss Hollis." The entire table went silent. "My nephew told me you used to work in the emergency department at St. Anselm." 7 years, sir." "Then let me ask you something." The 66-year-old man spoke slowly. "Last year, a friend of mine fell in his kitchen. He was conscious, talking, and able to stand up on his own. His wife called an ambulance, and he said there was no need, that it was only a fall. 6 hours later, he wouldn't wake up." He looked at her. "Tell me why." No one at the table moved. Marin placed her napkin down. "May I ask, was your friend taking blood thinners?" Conrad looked up. "Yes." "Then it was almost certainly an epidural hematoma," she said. "When the head hits something, a small blood vessel between the skull and the lining of the brain can tear. It bleeds slowly. During the first few hours, the patient can remain awake, can talk, can even walk around. We call that period the lucid interval. That lucid interval is what kills people, because it makes everyone believe nothing is wrong. Once enough blood builds up to put pressure on the brain, everything happens very quickly. And by then it's too late," she continued, her voice calm. "For someone taking blood thinners, the lucid interval can last longer, and the bleeding can be heavier. In the emergency department, anyone over 65 who falls, hits their head, and is taking blood thinners gets a CT scan. Even if they're laughing and talking normally, nobody gets sent home." She paused. "Your friend didn't die because of the fall, sir. He died because he looked fine." The table fell silent. It wasn't the silence of someone being put in their place. It was a different silence. The silence of 31 people realizing that the woman in the altered dress knew something none of them knew. Conrad Ferraro remained still for a long time. Then the old man spoke quietly. "Thank you." He picked up his fork. "For 6 months, I've thought there was something I could have done." "You couldn't," she said. "But now you know. Next time you'll call the ambulance." Dinner continued, and for the next 20 minutes, 4 people on the other side of the table turned to ask her about other things, and an older woman asked whether she could look over her husband's prescriptions. In the middle of the table, Brand Ferraro set down his wineglass. He stood, carrying a thick stack of papers he'd left beneath his chair, and walked down the length of the table until he was 3 steps from August. "Before everyone has dessert," he said, loudly enough for all 31 people to hear, "I think the family should know who they're sitting with." He threw the stack of papers onto the table. It slid across the wood and stopped beside Marin's plate. Nursing license revoked. Under investigation by the Board of Nursing for practicing without a valid license. Overdue medical debt. And an agreement with St. Anselm Hospital that she herself signed in exchange for money. He looked around the table. 31 people sitting here, and the woman beside the head of the table is that kind of person. August Ferraro stood. He didn't hesitate. Not half a second, not any fraction of a second. He walked 3 steps and stopped between Brand and Marin's chair, standing there and blocking her from an entire row of people. "Anyone in this room who reads a single word in those papers," he said, and he spoke so quietly that the people at the far end of the table had to lean forward, "isn't family anymore tonight." No one touched the papers. 31 people sat motionless. Conrad Ferraro placed one hand on the table, slowly, and looked at Brand with an expression no one there had ever seen him use toward a member of his own family. "Sit down, Brand." "Uncle." I said sit down. Brand sat. Dinner ended earlier than usual. One by one, people left, and by 11, only a few servers remained on the back terrace clearing the tables, while Marin stood alone at the head of the table as August walked his uncle out to his car. The stack of papers was still there. No one had touched it. She picked it up. She didn't read it. She'd lived with every word in it for 3 years already. She only intended to fold it up and take it home to burn. But when she lifted it, the stack loosened slightly in the middle, and her eyes fell on the lower right corner of one page. There, printed in faint gray ink, was a small string of characters, an 11-character identification code, beginning with 3 letters. Marin Hollis stood frozen in the middle of the back terrace, where several of the lights had already been turned off. She knew what that string of characters was. She'd seen it exactly once in her life. 3 years earlier, on the paper they'd given her to sign in a small room on the 4th floor of St. Anselm Hospital, and the lawyer that day had told her the original would be sealed, and no one would be allowed to copy it. She flipped quickly to the final page. The same string of characters appeared there. This stack wasn't a circulating copy. It had been copied from the original document sitting in a sealed archive. She stood there for a long time, the papers in her hands, and she didn't yet understand what that meant. She only knew one thing for certain. This was something that should never have existed in the world. Her phone was still on silent, and she was still standing there with the stack of papers in her hands when August's phone rang outside on the terrace. He listened for 15 seconds, then walked back inside, and she saw something on his face she'd never seen before. What happened? The warehouse at Pier 9. From the back terrace of the Ferraro estate, the harbor was visible, and they could see a column of black smoke rising into the sky, still bright with Independence Day fireworks, with a red glow spreading across the water beneath it. Far away, that was all. No sound reached them here. Conrad Ferraro hadn't even gotten into his car yet. The old man stood at the entrance, staring toward the column of smoke, and he stood there for a long time. "Who manages that warehouse?" he asked, even though he already knew. Fen Dolan had arrived, his sleeves rolled up, one hand wrapped in a bandage because he'd managed to reach the scene and return. "Brand, anyone inside?" "No. The night shift was off for the holiday." "What's in the warehouse?" "Empty container shells and a shipment of old air compressors." Conrad turned toward the advisor. "Insurance." Fen hesitated for one beat. "Coverage was increased on June 16th, 4 times the previous amount." The old man said nothing more. He stood there staring toward the column of smoke, and in 20 years of sitting at the head of the upstairs dining room table, it was the first time Conrad Ferraro had thought of his own nephew's name, the way a man thinks of an outsider's. Marin hadn't heard all of it. She'd already turned to the 11th page of the papers in her hands. the page listing the parties involved in the St. Anselm Agreement, and her eyes stopped at the fourth line from the bottom. A company name. Keller House Property Holdings. She knew that name. She'd seen it printed on a small sign attached to the lobby door of the building where she'd lived with her husband 3 years earlier, the 4-story building in Dorchester, the building where she'd managed to pull 2 people outside but hadn't been able to reach the third. She looked up. Keller House Property Holdings, she said. Fen Dolan turned faster than necessary. August looked at her. What is that? I'm asking you. It's a real estate company owned by my family, he said. It holds about 30 rental properties in Dorchester and Mattapan. Why? Marin set the papers down on the table. Who manages it? Brand. For 4 seconds, no one said anything. And who approves its decisions? August Ferraro stood completely still. Me. She nodded, very slowly, twice. 3 years ago, my husband was a building safety inspector for the city, she said, and her voice was so even that it was frightening. His name was Elias Hollis. That August, he filed a report about a 4-story building on Bowden Street in Dorchester. The report said the fire alarm system in that building had been disconnected from the central control panel, and that someone had deliberately done it to avoid paying maintenance costs. She looked straight at him. That report was filed away. 3 weeks later, the building caught fire. The alarms didn't sound. Not a single alarm sounded anywhere in that building. Fen Dolan stepped back half a pace. I pulled an old woman and her son out from the 2nd floor. When I went back for the 3rd person, I reached the 3rd floor landing and the staircase collapsed. She raised a hand to her left forearm. I brought this home from that night. My husband didn't come home. August Ferraro didn't move. You approved that building, she said. You approved the decision to cut the maintenance contract for the fire alarm system. He didn't ask whether she was sure. He didn't say they needed to check the records. He didn't say any of the things a wealthy man with lawyers usually said. He simply stood there, and when he finally spoke, his voice had gone rough. I signed it, he said. That year, I signed roughly 400 Keller House decisions. I didn't read a single one. Brand put them in front of me, and I signed. He looked at her. I didn't read it. That doesn't make me any less guilty. Marin stood still. Then she nodded, picked up her bag, and walked out. Marin. She didn't stop. Marin. She walked through the foyer, through the front door, down the steps, and out into the front parking area, where only a few cars remained beneath 2 lights. She made it halfway across the lot when someone stepped out from the shadow of a car. Theodora Vance stood there, holding a brown envelope. Miss Hollis. Marin stopped. I'm not in the mood. I know, Teddy said. She held out the envelope. Take it. What is it? The insurance contract for the Bowden Street building. The original, from 3 years ago, and an endorsement changing the beneficiary, signed 2 months before the fire. Marin didn't reach for it. Why? Because my father kept copies of everything he ever acted as an intermediary for, and he acted as the intermediary on that contract, Teddy Vance said. And because 4 years ago, someone in the Ferraro family arranged an engagement for me without asking me once. That person wasn't August. She pressed the envelope into Marin's hand. I'm not helping you, she said. I'm just paying a debt to myself. Then she turned and walked toward her car. Marin stood in the parking lot and opened the envelope beneath the light. The first page was the fire insurance policy for the 4-story building at 222 Bowden Street. The second page was the endorsement, dated June 11th of that year, increasing the coverage limit 5-fold. In the lower right corner of the endorsement was a small string of characters printed in faint gray ink. 11 characters, beginning with 3 letters. Exactly the kind of identification code she'd just seen on the back terrace, on the stack of papers Brand Ferraro had thrown onto the dinner table. 2 documents from 2 different incidents 3 years apart, belonging to 2 entirely different agencies, carried the same archive code prefix. That meant they'd been copied from the same place, by the same person. Marin Hollis stood beneath the light in the Ferraro estate parking lot at midnight on July 4th, and inside her mind, 3 years of silence began to move. August Ferraro didn't go after her. He stood on the front steps and watched her old car turn onto the main road, and he understood that if he chased after her that night, there was only one thing he would be asking for: forgiveness, and that was the one thing he had no right to ask. He went back inside. At 4 in the morning on July 5th, he called his uncle. The next morning, The two men sat in the study on the first floor of the estate, with 19 ledgers and 4 boxes of Keller House Property Holdings records spread across the floor. "What are you going to do with all this?" Conrad asked. "I'm going to read it. 4 years of paperwork. Then I'll read 4 years." They read for 9 days. By the 4th day, Conrad Ferraro found what they had both been looking for. A chain of 11 maintenance contracts terminated within 14 months, all involving fire alarm and emergency exit systems, all in low-rent apartment buildings, all accompanied by an insurance coverage increase 4 to 8 weeks later. 4 of those 11 buildings had burned down. The old man sat very still for a long time on the wooden chair amid the piles of records. "I've sat at that table for 20 years, he said, "and I never saw it." "You signed every single one," August said. "You saw even less than I did." On the 7th day, he found something else. It was a regular payment from Keller House's operating fund, once every quarter for 8 consecutive quarters, recorded under outside legal consulting. There was no contract attached, no invoice. The recipient was a consulting company in Braintree, and when he traced the company owner's name, he stared at the screen for a long time. It was Fen Dolan's brother-in-law. On July 15th, August requested that the council be convened. But before he called the meeting, he did something no one knew about. Over 4 days, he met privately with each man. He made no promises to anyone. He simply placed in front of them the list of 11 terminated maintenance contracts and the names of the 4 buildings that had burned, then sat in silence and let them read. 61-year-old Sal Peretti reached the 3rd building, pushed the papers away, and stopped reading. "Did anyone die?" the old man asked. "Yes." "How many?" "I haven't finished counting." Sal Peretti looked down at his hands. "Back in March, I raised my hand against you." "I know. I raised it because I thought you were going to lose," the old man said. "I'm sorry." By the 4th day, August had counted 4. He called Conrad and said one thing: "I'm going to ask for a confidence vote myself." The old man remained silent on the other end for a long time. "You understand that if you call for it yourself, Brand will be forced to openly challenge for the chair." "I understand." "He'll have to say it out loud, in front of 6 men, that he wants that chair." "Yes." Conrad Ferraro let out a long breath. "Your father would have liked that move." That afternoon, August called Fen Dolan to the upstairs dining room. Just the 2 of them. He said nothing. He placed a sheet of paper on the table and pushed it toward the advisor, then sat down in the head chair and remained silent. Fen Dolan looked at the paper. He didn't pick it up. He stood there, still holding his coat as he always did, and for 30 seconds no one said a word. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down, and he was the first person in 20 years to sit at that table without waiting to be invited. 2 years, he said. Not 8 quarters, 2 years and 4 months. August said nothing. "It wasn't about the money, August. I haven't spent a single dollar of it. It's sitting untouched in an account my brother-in-law doesn't even know the password to." "Then what was it for?" Fen Dolan placed his coat on the table. "That night on February 14th, I was supposed to go with your father to Kestrel," he said. "I always went with the old man. For 20 years I hadn't missed a single one." He looked down at the tabletop. "That night, I had something personal to deal with. I told him I'd be 40 minutes late. He said it was fine. He'd been driving that route his whole life." August sat in silence. "I arrived 55 minutes late," Fen said. "Not 40. The upstairs dining room was so quiet they could hear cars moving along Hanover Street below. 3 months later, Brand came to see me. He brought a parking lot access record from that night, showing the time I left my parking space." Fen said. "He told me he wouldn't show it to you as long as I remained useful to him." He looked up, his eyes red. 20 years. August. He held me by the throat for 20 years with one piece of paper. August Ferraro said nothing for a very long time. Then he stood, walked to the window, and turned his back. "You sat at my family's dinner table," he said. "You carried me when I was 3. You stood beside me at my father's funeral and put your hand on my shoulder. I know. And for 20 years, you let me believe that night had simply been bad luck." Fen Dolan couldn't answer. "I don't forgive you," August said, still facing the window. "I don't think I ever will. Don't ask me about that again. Ever." "I wasn't going to ask." August turned around. "But the council meets Thursday," he said. "And you'll sit in your chair, and you'll tell those 6 men exactly what you just told me, in front of all of them. Fen Dolan stood. He looked much older than he had the day before. "It'll destroy me." "Yes," August said, "but you'll do it yourself. That's the only thing I can still give you." For 11 days, Maren Hollis didn't work the night shift. She took unpaid leave, and every morning she got up at 5, sat down at the dining table pressed against the wall, and started from the place where she'd stopped on the night of July 4th. 2 strings of characters. She began with the easiest thing, which was asking questions. She called a woman who had once worked in the St. Anselm archives, someone Maren had brought coffee down to in the basement for 7 years whenever she worked a night shift. The woman was retired now, and living in Lowell, and she listened as Maren read the string of characters over the phone, then stayed silent for a moment. "The first 3 letters are the identifier for a court-ordered sealed archive," she said. "The next 8 characters are the access number. Who's allowed into that archive? No one. That archive requires 2 keys, one held by the hospital's legal department and one held by the court clerk. So, if a copy got out, then someone had to carry it out," she said. "And every time the archive is opened, it has to be logged. Name, date, time, reason." 3 days later, through a legal aid attorney in Roxbury whom she'd referred patients to many times, Maren obtained a copy of the St. Anselm sealed archive access log covering the previous 3 years. It was a single sheet of paper. In 22 months, the archive had been opened exactly 9 times. 4 names. 3 of them were legal department employees, and all 3 had retired and moved away, 1 to Florida and 2 to North Carolina, all before the Bowdoin Street building insurance endorsement had been signed. 1 name remained, appearing on the 7th and 9th entries, both times with the stated reason being professional record verification: Dr. Halden Pryor, Chief of Emergency Medicine at St. Anselm Hospital. The man who had sat across from her in that small 4th-floor room 3 years earlier and told her to sign it, that everything would be over, that everyone made mistakes sometimes. Maren placed the paper on the table and sat there for a long time without moving. Then she stood, opened the drawer beneath the sink, and took out the hardbound notebook. Not the notebook with her clinic plans. The other one. The notebook she'd put away 3 years ago and never opened again. Inside was her handwritten account of the night shift on September 19th of that year, the night everything had begun. She'd written it down from memory during the first week after she was suspended, because 7 years in emergency medicine had taught her that when something happened, you had to record it immediately, before memory started rewriting itself. She read every line again, and she found it on the 3rd page. That night, before the patient who received the wrong medication dosage, she'd done something completely ordinary. She went to check the medication storage room on the 2nd floor, because the fire alarm in the storage hallway was giving a false alarm, and while she waited for the technician to come shut it off, she opened the paper records cabinet looking for the medication distribution log. She found 3 medical charts, stacked on top of one another, all with the same Bowdoin Street address. 3 different patients with different names but the same admission date, the same diagnosis, and the same approving signature. 3 people she was certain she'd never seen in the emergency department on any night that month. She had written their 3 names into the shift log and reported them to the charge nurse. 27 hours later, her signature appeared on a medication order she had never signed. Maren Hollis sat in the middle of the small kitchen on the 3rd floor of the red brick building, one hand resting on the notebook, and 3 years of silence shattered all at once. She hadn't made a mistake. Not ever. She had simply opened the wrong records cabinet by accident, on a night when the Bowdoin Street building was being stripped of money through fabricated medical charts used to make fraudulent health insurance claims, 2 months before that same building burned because its alarms no longer worked. The person who buried her was Halden Pryor. The person paying Halden Pryor was Keller House Property Holdings. The person managing Keller House was Brand Ferraro. And 3 weeks after the night she wrote those 3 names into the shift log, her husband filed a report about that exact building. She'd always thought her life had been broken twice, once by the fire, and once by having her profession taken from her. It turned out there had only been one break, just one thread, and she'd been standing exactly where it had been tied without knowing it. On the morning of July 19th, she called Ferraro's and asked to speak with Conrad Ferraro. The old man met her downstairs, among the chairs still turned upside down on the tables. "If you came to see my nephew, he isn't here." "I didn't come to see him." She placed a thick stack of papers on the table. "I came to see you." Conrad looked at the stack. "What do you want?" "Nothing." she said. "I'm not asking you to protect me. I'm not asking you to erase my brother's debt. I'm not asking you for a single word." She opened the stack to the first page. "This is the access log for the St. Anselm sealed archive. This is the list of 11 maintenance contracts that were terminated. These are 3 fabricated medical charts with the Bowden Street address. And these are 2 identical archive codes on 2 documents 3 years apart." She pushed the stack toward him. "You're the man who sits at the head of the table. Read it." Conrad Ferraro put on his glasses. He read for 25 minutes without saying a word. Then he folded the stack closed and looked at the woman sitting across from him. "The council meets Thursday," he said. "You're coming." On Thursday, July 22nd, 7 people sat around the long table in the upstairs dining room at Ferraro's, and this time, when August walked in, no one stood, because under the rules of that room, the man who had personally requested a confidence vote was no longer the man in charge for the duration of the meeting. Brand Ferraro sat in the 3rd chair on the left, looking completely at ease. "Let me say this up front and keep it simple." He began the moment Conrad set the leather ledger down. "My cousin has put the chair itself up for a vote, so I don't think we need to pretend anymore. I want that chair. I'm saying it plainly, in front of all 6 of you." He looked around the table. "For 4 years, this family has been moving backward. I have a name. I have connections. I have numbers. Anyone who wants to keep moving backward can raise his hand for him." Conrad Ferraro said nothing. The old man looked toward the door. The door opened. Maren Hollis walked in, wearing exactly what she wore to work, a gray blouse and black trousers, her hair tied low, a file folder in her hand. She didn't greet anyone. She walked straight to the end of the table on Conrad's side and placed the file down. "She doesn't belong in here," Brand said. "I invited her," Conrad replied. "You don't have the authority. During a confidence vote, the chair has the authority to call a witness." The old man said without looking up. "Article 9. Your father wrote it, Brand. Your father himself." Maren opened the file. She didn't make a speech. She didn't say a single word about justice, about morality, or about who she was. She read the way 7 years in an emergency department had taught her to read medical records in front of the attending physician, beginning with dates and never saying a word that wasn't in the file. March 11th, 3 years ago. Keller House Property Holdings terminated the fire alarm maintenance contract at 222 Bowden Street, Dorchester. Decision number 472, proposed by Brand Ferraro. She turned the page. June 11th of the same year. Fire insurance endorsement for the same building, increasing the coverage limit 5-fold. The first 3 characters of the archive code identify the St. Anselm sealed archive. She turned another page. September 19th of the same year. 3 emergency department medical charts carrying the same address, 222 Bowden Street. 3 different patients, same admission date, same diagnosis, same approving signature. The approving physician was Dr. Halden Pryor. None of those 3 patients were at the hospital that night. I was on duty that night. No one in the room moved. On September 20th, I entered those 3 names into the shift log. On September 21st, a signature bearing my name appeared on a medication order I never signed. On October 11th, I was suspended. She turned the page. November 6th, City Building Safety Inspector Elias Hollis filed a report about the fire alarm system being disconnected in that same building. The report was buried. November 29th, the building burned. She looked up for the first time. Not a single alarm sounded. She placed the final page down. The St. Anselm sealed archive access log covers 22 months. 9 openings, 4 names. 3 of those people had left the state before June. The 4th person opened the archive twice, both times after I had been suspended. Dr. Halden Pryor. Conrad Ferraro turned. Fen Dolan stood from his chair. He carried no papers. He spoke for 4 minutes, and he repeated exactly what he'd said in this room 7 days earlier, including the 55 minutes. Including the parking access record, including the name of the man who had kept that record for 20 years. When he finished, he sat down and looked at no one. Sal Peretti raised a hand to his mouth. Marchetti stared down at the table, and Brand Ferraro shot to his feet. "He's lying," he said, and for the first time in his life, he raised his voice in that room. "This whole thing is staged. A diner girl and some washed-up old man. Sit down, Brand. You believe her over your own blood? Sit down. I'm family," he shouted. His chair fell backward. Wood struck the floor, feet scraped hard against it, and someone called his name. He lunged toward the head of the table where Conrad was sitting, and before he could take 3 steps, 2 men had already risen to block him. One on the left, one on the right. There was a brief struggle. The sound of a glass tipping over, then harsh breathing. 4 seconds. The entire room stood motionless and watched. Then it was over, and in the silence that followed, the only sound was water dripping from the edge of the table onto the wooden floor. Conrad Ferraro remained seated exactly where he was. The old man hadn't moved once. "You just answered for everyone in this room," he said. He opened the leather ledger, picked up his pen, and wrote for about a minute. Then he read it aloud. Recorded July 22nd. The 7-member council declares Brand Ferraro no longer a member of the Ferraro family. No name in the ledger, no share in anything bearing this family name, and no one in this family is permitted to receive him, assist him, or speak to him. Effective today. He closed the ledger. "Take him out." They took him out through the back door. When the door closed, Conrad Ferraro removed his glasses and turned to Marin. "And what about your part?" "My part doesn't belong in this room," she said. "This afternoon, I'm sending the entire file on Dr. Halden Pryor to the State Medical Board and to the Federal Prosecutor's Office. Those 3 fabricated medical charts are health insurance fraud. That's the court's business, not yours." Conrad nodded slowly. "You know that doing that means you'll have to testify again about what happened to you." "I know," she said. "I've been silent for 3 years. I won't be silent anymore." The old man stood. He walked around the table, stopped in front of her, and bowed his head slightly, a gesture he hadn't given to an outsider in 70 years. "My nephew chose correctly," he said. "I'm just too old to have seen it sooner." The Massachusetts Board of Medicine took 11 months to reopen Marin Hollis's case. During those 11 months, she worked under the supervision of a retired physician named Francis Odell, 72 years old, who had practiced in Roxbury for 30 years, read through her entire file in one afternoon, then called her back and said exactly one thing, that she would stand behind her. The vacant storefront on Prince Street was renovated over 4 months. August paid for it, but he didn't give it to her. He signed a loan agreement with interest, to be paid back over 10 years, and Marin read every line before signing, and she even made him change 2 clauses. He didn't say a word. He simply changed them. Dr. Halden Pryor was suspended in October and indicted in January for health insurance fraud. The 3 fabricated medical charts carrying the Bowdoin Street address were entered into the case file. On February 14th of that year, the letter from the Board of Medicine arrived at 4 in the afternoon. Wesley ran up 3 flights of stairs, handed it to his sister, and stood there watching her open it. Marin Elizabeth Hollis's nursing license had been fully reinstated, accompanied by a written finding that the revocation 3 years earlier had been without basis. She read it twice, then folded it and slipped it into her coat pocket, and she didn't cry, because there were still 2 hours before opening time. At 7 that evening, Kestrel Clinic opened its doors for the first time. The waiting room was packed. Mrs. Ottilie Kranz from apartment 7 brought down 2 trays of pastries and immediately claimed the corner table to divide them among everyone, and she announced to anyone who walked past that she'd lived in this building for 31 years and had known from the beginning that the girl from the 3rd floor would make it. Wesley stood on a chair taping the hours sign to the glass, crooked, and his sister made him take it down and put it back up, and he did it 3 times. Nearly 70 people came that night. A middle-aged man stood near the end of the line, with his 7-year-old daughter holding his hand, and when it was their turn, he sat down and said the girl had been coughing for a month, and he'd been agonizing over bringing her because he had no insurance. Marin examined the little girl, wrote something on a small piece of paper, and told the father to take it to the pharmacy on the corner and say these exact words. The girl was given a cookie and a star-shaped sticker, and she stuck it on the back of her hand, then held it up proudly for her father to see. The man thanked her 3 times. In the waiting room, children's laughter and footsteps moved around the rows of chairs, always with their parents sitting right there watching them. In the corner of the room, behind the half-open door, the stray dog that had waited at Kestrel's back door every night for 3 years had found its way here the week before, and now it slept on the old blanket Wesley had spread out for it. At 8, the doorbell rang. August Ferraro walked in wearing his black wool coat, a small cardboard box in his hand. He didn't say anything to anyone. He walked through the waiting room, stopped at the reception desk, and waited until she had finished examining the last person in line. Then he held out his hand. "Come outside with me for a minute." The small balcony behind the clinic was barely large enough for 2 people. Below was the alley and the sound of cars moving along Prince Street. 7 months earlier, on another balcony on the night of July 4th, someone had stepped out of the darkness. Tonight there was no one. Just the 2 of them and the half-closed door behind them. August opened the cardboard box. Inside was not a diamond ring. It was the silver ring he'd worn on his little finger for 15 years. His father's ring. The one thing he'd kept from before the night he became the man he was now. "I thought for a long time about what I should say," he said. "Then I realized I only had one sentence." He held out the ring. "On the night of February 14th that year, you were the first person in my life to give me something without asking for it back. You pulled an extra plastic chair in from the balcony, and you didn't ask me a single question." He looked at her. "I didn't become a good man, Marin. I'm not going to lie to you about that. I only became a man who had something to lose." He paused for a beat. "Let me keep that something for the rest of my life." Marin Hollis looked at the ring, then at him. "You know I'm never going to be easy to live with." "I know. And I'm still going to argue with you. I'm counting on it." "Then all right," she said. "All right." And when the 2 of them turned back inside, the entire waiting room had crowded toward the back door. 70 people packed into a room that was far too small for them, and every one of them had been listening from beginning to end. And when the door opened, the whole room erupted. Mrs. Ottilie clapped the loudest. Wesley whistled. The dog woke up, barked twice, then went back to sleep. Marin Hollis and August Ferraro's story ended there, in a small clinic on Prince Street, on the exact day 1 year earlier, when she had asked a stranger whether he really intended to sit there all by himself. There are some things it takes an entire lifetime to understand. That a person's true worth isn't measured by what they own, but by how many people are willing to make room for them when they have nothing left. That scars, whether they lie on the skin or somewhere deep inside the heart, aren't things that need to be hidden, because every scar is proof that we made it through something, and we're still here. That kindness given without calculation, without expecting repayment, without waiting for anyone to take credit for it, is the bravest act an ordinary human being can make in a lifetime, because it requires us to open our hearts at exactly the moment when we have the strongest reason to close them. That none of us gets to choose where we're born, none of us gets to choose our family, our past, or the losses that arrive without asking permission. But every one of us gets to choose what kind of person we will become starting tomorrow. And that home has never been an address written on paper. Home is where someone remembers us, saves a meal for us, and pulls out another chair without needing us to ask. If this story touched your heart in some way, please leave a like, share this video with the people you love, and subscribe to our channel so we can continue sharing more meaningful stories with you every day. How do you feel about Marin and August? And what part of this story made you think of someone in your own life? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below, because we truly want to hear what's in your heart. May you and your family always have good health, a joyful life, and peace every day. Goodbye, and we'll see you again in the next video.